Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Pittsburgh Sports Memories podcast. I'm Tim Hannon,
And I'm Steve Wirt.
and today we're going to do the top 10 Pitt losses ever. So, if you're a fan of a sports team, you have to deal with the fact that there's going to be losses. And some teams have like bad losses where they get blown out, and disappointing losses where you thought they were going to win. And then of course tragic losses where maybe last second miracle play or something to that effect. I really feel like, as a Pitt fan, that Pitt has kind of redefined the category of gut-wrenching losses into its own category, and they've redefined this multiple times over the years. And so Steve, before we start, I mean, you and I have been Pitt fans most of our lives. Well, just briefly describe your experience as a Pitt fan.
Uh, you know, it's been like I said, like my dad was never a big Steelers fan or like a pro football kind of person. He always loved college football. So I guess that was kind of like how it translated to me. And I always kind of liked college football a little bit more than the pros. It's a lot more unpredictable. And the guys who play it seem to be more passionate. It's not all about the money. I mean, I think we're all pretty like convinced now that, by this point in our lives, like people are getting paid to do this at the upper level. Like the top 10, 20 teams in college football are all paying their stars, right? I mean, is that even debatable at this point? I mean, but I also remember Clemson remember they used to have Clemsoning because I mean, maybe I should say that for the end, but maybe there is hope for Pitt to one day. But I don't think I think what's even worse for Clemson is Clemson always takes football seriously, and they still kind of had those Pitt kind of losses. So I mean, maybe like with the last couple of years, Clemson has definitely broke out of that. But it's just one thing after another, and there's been like you said, like I think Bill Simmons, who used to work for ESPN, and I think he does his own podcast now.
Hmm.
Like had the like different levels of losses, like the gut punch and the minor annoyance and
Right. I remember.
yeah, the stub your toe loss. So I don't know. I just it's very tough being a Pitt fan because college football in general never like very. I think they take their fans for granted because they just figure they're going to show up every year because it's such a tradition and people are so it's almost like family, and I don't know. They do a lot of things wrong in college football, and Pitt isn't immune from that, and kind of is probably a pretty good like representative of all the problems, like just the way they take advantage of the fans not having a for real championship game, voting on things to actual competition. It's not just voting on the Heisman, which is who. It's just an award, but they actually vote on who gets to play at the end of the season. Like they used to actually vote on the national champion. And then they
Right.
finally got it. Oh, we'll vote on the top two teams. And now they got, well, top four. Like, well, why can't you just have it all? It would be so easy to be decided on the field.
Right. Right. And like there's all those issues with college football. Pitt definitely, because of the landscape, it's not easy for them to compete with like a Clemson, like you mentioned. But I mean, so Pitt kind of is what they are, and that's fine. Like we can
Well,
still
they're
be
no
fans of
different.
that.
There's 100 different, and we're gonna go through. We're gonna see there's like you can name like 10 other like colleges that are in the exact same boat as Pitt.
Right.
Like
Right.
I
But
can name five off the top of my head: Boston College, Syracuse, Miami. Um, I don't know, Illinois. I
yeah, there's a
you
bunch
get
of those. Yeah,
yeah.
and the Power Five conferences are made up probably most of those schools, and then the real powerhouses. But I think with Pitt,
I say Georgia Tech. Yeah, I mean it's just
sure,
you're talking schools that are in a city, not in the middle of nowhere. There's already a pro sports team that kind of sucks up all the oxygen.
sure.
You know what I mean? That's the popular team in
But
each one of those circumstances. And these colleges, they have their fan base, but they don't, I don't, that they're just never going to be like Penn State or Ohio State. Like, what else is there to do in Ann Arbor, Columbus? Nothing against Clemson, South Carolina, or Tuscaloosa, Alabama. There's no pro teams there. They're the big game in town.
Totally agree. But I think all those other schools you mentioned, like, okay, so they have the same issues. They have the same kind of up and down, years that Pitt has had. But I don't know that any of them lose games in the fashion, just the historically tragic fashion that Pitt seems to lose games. And for me, like, there's three sports teams that I like am invested in, that I actively root for and that my heart's really invested in. It's the Steelers, Penguins, and Pitt football. And I feel like, the Steelers and Penguins have in the last 15 years have won multiple championships. And that's unusual. You don't When you're a sports fan, you don't get that. You don't get multiple championships from two of your favorite teams in that short of a time span. It's just not a normal thing. And so I feel like Pitt has balanced that out. Like the sports gods have like unfairly balanced, like had to tip the scale so far in the other direction to balance that out. And that's really what we're talking about here is Pitt just finding the most unimaginable ways to lose games.
Well, I mean, can you imagine the '70s though, when all of them? Well, even the Penguins didn't win the cup, but they made the playoffs. But all three of those teams were really good in the '70s. So
Yeah,
time to be alive.
yeah. Well, the sports gods must have been asleep at the wheel during the '70s, but they certainly have been awake since. All right. So if this concept doesn't make sense, like what are we talking about when we talk about a Pitt loss? I think the first one on our list will do a good job illustrating like the idea here. And so number 10 on our list is the 2020 game at Boston College. So in 2020, Pitt is projected to have a pretty good team, lots of veterans coming back. And due to the COVID reshuffling, their schedule all of a sudden gets a lot harder. They have to play Miami, Notre Dame. They have to go to Clemson. So if they want to have any kind of shot of competing in the ACC and making it back to the ACC championship game where they had been in 2018, then they really can't afford to lose to any of the middle tier teams in the conference. And the season starts off really good. Pitt goes 3-0 in their first three games. That's the first time in a long time that they start 3-0. They're ranked in the top 25, but then they as Pitt usually does, they have a stumble against NC State and lose that game. And now they're headed to New England to face another one of those middle tier ACC teams in Boston College. And they can't if they lose this, then there's no chance of them contending in the conference at that point. And the game doesn't go well. The Pitt defense was really the strength of the team in 2020. And they get picked apart by the Boston College passing game. And they find themselves trailing 24-21 in the final minutes. But they put together kind of one last gasp drive. They get all the way down to the BC 26-yard line where they have a 3rd and 5. So, Steve, what's the absolute last thing you want to do in that situation?
Well, you definitely don't want to take a sack, that's for sure.
No. I mean, you want to try to get a first down because you'd rather score a touchdown to win the game. But the absolute worst thing you can do is take a sack and knock yourself out of field goal range. And of course, that's exactly what quarterback Kenny Pickett does. He takes a 15-yard sack too. I mean, sometimes you kind of step up in the pocket and it's like a 4-yard sack. This is a 15-yard sack. So now they're way out of field goal range. They have to just throw up some kind of prayer, Hail Mary on 4th down. But then head coach Pat Narduzzi shocks everyone by sending his kicker, Alex Kessman, out onto the field. Kessman has a really strong leg. We've seen him kick really long field goals before, but this is 58 yards. I mean, NFL kickers.
I saw the 55-yarder in Heinz Field in the open end in the rain against it was raining when he did it against Syracuse. Like when I saw them line up for that one, I thought this is impossible. It's over 50 yards in the open end to Heinz Field, which isn't as bad as it used to be since they added more seats. It kind of calmed the wind down, but it was raining.
Yeah.
And he nailed it. He absolutely nailed it. But that's kind of Kessman's bugaboo has always been strong leg, can kick the long ones, but he's inaccurate. He does have an act like he cost them a game at Notre Dame a couple years ago where he missed 3 field goals. They would have won that game.
Right.
if he just hits 2 of them.
Right. So this is, yeah. So this is 58 yards. And I guess like Narduzzi's thinking, like you said, we've seen him kick long field goals before. And plus it's like 4th and 20 at this point. I mean, what are you really going to do? You're going to throw up a prayer. So he probably figures this has just as good a chance as of converting a 4th and 20.
Well,
So guess,
that's the longest field goal in Heinz Field history, college or pro, I'm pretty sure, that one
yeah.
against Syracuse. So, yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, yeah, that's pretty impressive. So we know he can do it. 58 yards is pretty long. He comes out and he promptly drills it. 58-yard field goal to send the game into overtime. It's the longest field goal in school history. If you're keeping track, that's 116 seasons of Pitt football. No one's ever kicked a ball that far before in a game. So Kessman makes history. Game goes into overtime. In the top of the overtime frame, Boston College scores a touchdown. So now Pitt has to score a touchdown in their frame to keep the game going. And twice they're down to their final play. It's they have a 4th and 7 and a 4th and 1. But both of those times, Pickett converts and he runs on both of them. And then 2 plays later, he finds Tasir Mack in the end zone. So wow, what a heroic effort, right? Keeping Pitt in contention in the ACC. They send the game into overtime. Then down to their last play twice, they score a touchdown. So now Kessman comes out for the extra point and he misses it wide to the right. and so this is, again, when we're talking about a tragic loss versus like a in its own category Pitt loss, like a healthy, functional, well-balanced football team would have lost this game by missing the almost 60-yard kick, or they would have gone to overtime and been down to their 4th down and not converted, and it would have been like, hey, good effort, came up short, it is what it is. We lost the game, but that's not Pitt. That's not how they go down, right? Because they're not a healthy, functional program. They're a dysfunctional football program that's addicted to tragedy. And so the way they have to lose this game is by making the same guy that makes the longest field goal in Pitt history comes out and misses the easiest kick in football, the extra point. So to me, that's a perfect one to start with because it's just exactly what we're talking about, a classic example of a Pitt loss.
Yeah. That's once again, like, I'm become a big believer of this the more I've watched college football is if you're the team to go second, like in an overtime, in like your offense scores a touchdown and you're kicking the extra point for the tie, I think you should go for 2 more time, like just end it right there. Like, I know like why your defense obviously stinks, especially like at this point in the game. Like, you have your chance to win it right there. Take your shot, you know? I don't know. The longer
If they would have gone for 2, they would have had a receiver wide open in the end zone and he would have like dropped it or like
called offsides or holding or something.
Yeah. I mean, I can't, like, even if the thing with Pitt, it's like, even if you could write a script of like, okay, how can they possibly lose this game? Let's think of like a new way. You can't even think of ways until they go out and do it. So, but I agree with
This is
you on
only number
principle, though.
10. I know some of the other ones on the list that I know one on this list I'm going to get fired up about because I still kind of harbor a grudge about that one.
Well, let's move to number 9. Number 9 is definitely one that I will get fired up about because I remember at the time, this was a while ago, but I remember I just was
inspired
like throwing things. It did.
Which I think still exists to this day. So
it did.
Yeah.
Yes. So the number 9 game is the 2000 season at Syracuse. So let's talk about where the program is in the year 2000. The 1990s were absolutely a miserable time for Pitt football. Walt Harris was hired. He's now in his 4th season. And now, Walt kind of has like his team, right? His recruits, and they're starting to build something and they're really poised for a big year. And sure enough, they really opened the season on fire. They win their first 4 games of the year. That includes the 12-0 win over Penn State at Three Rivers Stadium, which is probably one of the biggest wins of Walt Harris's tenure. And then they head to the Carrier Dome to face Syracuse. Steve, I hate the Carrier Dome because it's always seemed like a place where Pitt teams just have bad luck, and not just the football team, like basketball or
Yeah.
women's lacrosse or whatever. It just seems like no matter what, if you send a Pitt sport athletic team there, things don't go well.
I don't know. Jamie Dixon had a lot of success there in his tenure, but that was kind of after this. Like I'll let you finish, but they did. Yeah, this
Well,
was part of
at
that
this
streak.
point, yeah, at
At
this
this point,
point,
there was a long streak, like you said, going back to the '80s of Pitt just inexplicably losing in the carry. Now,
yes,
granted, like you said, Donovan McNabb, Marvin Harrison, Dwight Freeney, pretty good players. It's hard to believe how good Syracuse was.
right, right. In the
I mean, there's
'90s,
another, yeah, there's another like Pitt level school. I mean, they're not in a big city like Pitt, but it's like another school and they were really good. They were a national powerhouse.
they were in the '90s. They had some really good teams, like you said,
Even in the '80s,
McNabb.
they were, yeah.
Yeah, but at this point in the year 2000, they're really just a mediocre team. And the guy who succeeds Donovan McNabb at quarterback is a kid that's actually from Pittsburgh. I think he was from Butler, and his name
Yes.
is Troy Nunes. And he kind of has an up and down career at Syracuse. He has some big wins, but then he also is like benched multiple times in his 4 years at Syracuse. Anyway, he's the starter for this game in 2000, which Pitt is favored to win. Pitt comes out to a 9-0 lead, but then Syracuse scores the next 17 points before John Turman, who was the Pitt quarterback that year, hits RJ English for a touchdown and a 2-point conversion to tie the game late. So we're headed to overtime in this one as well. And the kicking in this game was just abysmal. Nick Lotz was the Pitt kicker. He's already missed a field goal and an extra point. But the Syracuse kicker is even worse. He's missed 3 field goals,
I remember that.
including one that was actually in the final seconds that would have won the game instead of sending it to overtime.
I don't know why nobody could kick in a dome that day.
I know, I know. Yeah, the wind must have been blowing through the air conditioning vents or whatever.
Well, it is the Carrier Dome.
It
So.
is the Carrier Dome. So that bad kicking continued into the first overtime frame. Lotz misses a chip shot field goal for Pitt, but then fortunately they're bailed out because the Syracuse kicker misses his field goal in the bottom frame. So now it goes into a second overtime, and Syracuse has the ball first in this frame. And thanks to a Pitt sack, the Orange have a 3rd and 23. So Pitt's in great position, right? Because we know Syracuse can't make a field goal, and they have 3rd and 23. And so Pitt puts pressure on Nunes again on that play because they had just sacked in the previous play. And you almost have to see the replay of this play to believe it. I mean, he runs backwards to his right, then he runs backwards some more to his left. Like he pretty much runs like the length of the field to both sides. And at one point, he's all the way on his own 47-yard line. Like that's how far back he runs, being chased. Then he kind of runs forward a little bit near the sideline, and he just heaves a prayer into the end zone. And it's caught by a guy that you may have heard of before. His name is David Tyree. And the reason you've heard of him is because he caught a miracle pass in the Super Bowl against the Patriots when they were undefeated when he played for the New York Giants. And so David Tyree is a hero in New York. Well, before he was a hero for the New York Giants, catching a prayer in the Super Bowl, he was catching this ridiculous pass. So they score a touchdown on the most absurd, ridiculous play ever. Pitt has a chance to tie in the bottom of the frame, but Turman's pass to Antonio O'Brien falls incomplete on 4th down. And that's it. Pitt loses. Their undefeated season is over. And Steve, you mentioned the blog. It was called "Troy Nunes is an absolute magician."
It's still around. It still covers
Is it
Syracuse sports. Yeah, I
okay?
think. Yeah, I haven't checked in a while, but yeah, I used to read that. It's actually a pretty fun blog, even
Well,
if
in
you're
this
not into
game,
Syracuse. Yeah.
yeah, in this game, Troy Nunes was an absolute magician. I mean, it was just the most
Well, it
ridiculous.
used to have another name. Like when they first started, they had absolute was I don't know how to say it, like fornicating magician. If
Okay, okay, I gotcha.
yeah,
Well, there was
which is
probably a lot of me using the fornicating word after this play.
A couple of things I remember. Like us wanting to burn down the Carrier Dome at some point, and and two, I remember Bill Osborne was the radio guy at that time. He was like the color guy, and Sarah and Pitt got a penalty on one of their 2-point tries or something, and like I forget, it was like somebody, they said somebody covered up the tight end or something. It's one of those weird procedural ones. And I remember Bill Osborne, like, he must have not had the cough button on. And he was like, how the F do you get that penalty in like a 5 wide formation? And he literally dropped an F bomb on the radio. So
Nice.
this game was for everybody. And as a note, I've heard they are thinking of ripping down, like getting a new stadium for Syracuse.
Good. If they have the contest to like push the detonator, I'm going to enter.
You're signing up.
I'm signing up.
Well, that's because the dome is the same type that collapsed in the Metrodome a couple years ago under all the snow. So, and it's not like they never get snow in Syracuse all the time from like November to April,
Yes,
So,
that could be a concern.
yeah. So,
Well, our number 8 game, that's another one that I would remember being very angry. So the number 8 game is 2003 at Toledo. We said that the 2000 season was kind of the transition from, the bad team in the 90s to the up and coming team in the 2000s. Well, 2003 is supposed to be the transition from, up and coming to national powerhouse. Pitt's
yeah,
ranked.
they had the cathartic win at Syracuse. Actually, I think either the year before, like they put 56 points in the Carrier Dome. Maybe that was this year. They went up to the Carrier Dome and scored like 56 points. So
That's good. Maybe the curse
so that
is
was
over.
kind of turned everything. I think after that, Pitt's like really had a lot more success in the Carrier Dome. So
Yeah, it definitely.
You can thank Larry Fitzgerald for that.
Yes, definitely in recent years it's been better. So speaking of Larry Fitzgerald, that year 2003, Pitt's ranked in the top 10, and Fitzgerald is for sure the nation's most electric player. He's a Heisman candidate. Should have won the Heisman that year. We won't get into that argument again, but ridiculous.
I know Jason White was really good.
I mean, look at all the success he had afterwards. But anyway,
I mean, he's definitely, yeah. I mean, the Hall of Fame is just, the Canton is just waiting on Jason White for sure.
Right. But anyway, after 20 plus years of, basically mediocrity for Pitt, this is going to be the year, right? I mean, do you remember thinking that, Pitt, Steve, like this is the year that Pitt's really going to?
Well, I think mediocrity is being a little generous from at least for the 10 years in the 90s.
Yeah.
But, I mean, mediocrity was like a step up from absolute, human excrement, that they were in the 90s. So they're at respectability now. This was like going for national prominence.
Good point. Good point.
Yeah.
So, Pitt, like a lot of major conference teams, they have set up some easy non-conference opponents for their first few games. Just to warm up, you usually start with those kind of, teams that aren't that great. So in the third week of the season, they're scheduled to play at Toledo. Toledo's a MAC school. And up to this point, Pitt's 21-0 all time against the MAC. That's going to change in the next few years.
Yeah.
But, Toledo apparently never gets the message that they're supposed to be an automatic win. Toledo has a quarterback named Bruce Gradkowski, who is also from Pittsburgh, like Troy Nunes, and actually later plays for the Steelers. He shreds Pitt's defense for a school record 461 yards. But, Pitt's offense was so good that year that they still have the lead for the bulk of the game. And they have multiple chances to put the game away in the fourth quarter. They lead by 10 and have the ball in Toledo territory. But quarterback Rod Rutherford throws a bad interception. Toledo then drives 98 yards for a touchdown. That's a drive that includes multiple third and fourth down conversions to pull within 3. Pitt again has a chance to put the game away, but they can't convert a 3rd and 2. Toledo gets the ball back at their own 17-yard line and again drives all the way down the field. Gradkowski hits Lance Moore in the corner of the end zone for a 9-yard touchdown pass over Shante Spencer, the Pitt cornerback, with 45 seconds left. And just like that, the number 9 team in the country has lost to Toledo.
Yeah, that was. I remember before that game, they had somebody from Toledo, like a Toledo alum, or I don't know, the guy was the radio guy, and he said, not a lot of people go to Toledo because that game was in Toledo, which was odd too, because Pitt used to never go on the road to MAC schools; they always came here. But Toledo didn't lose a lot of games at home back then; they were pretty good. I forget who their coach was, but he actually was there a long time, even after that win. I think he got involved in some scandal and they had to fire him. But yeah, I don't know what to tell you. I mean, it was kind of like, I guess that was the beginning of like these MAC schools starting to like beat like teams because I think I mean, I haven't looked against even against Big Ten opponents. I bet they've had a lot more success since what was this 2003, 2002.
Yeah, I don't know that they've beaten somebody as high ranked as high as number 9. But Pitt was up for the challenge, I guess. And it just that season just kind of went south after that. So
Yeah, I what was 2003? Well, didn't they beat Virginia Tech later in that season?
they did, but they lost to Miami. They lost to Notre Dame. I mean, it
Yeah.
just wasn't the season that you thought it was going to
Well, because
be.
that was supposed to be the farewell tour of Miami and Virginia Tech
It
in the
was.
Big East, and that was like why Pitt really needed to be good so that they could, kind of say, oh, we're fine without you,
Right. Right.
So
Yeah. So one more note for this game. I was the game wasn't on TV. I was listening to it on the radio because
that's
it
right. It
wasn't
wasn't.
televised.
Yeah, it wasn't televised.
And I was like really just ticked off. And my girlfriend at the time, uh, I don't know, she was like after the game, she was trying to talk to me, and I was just being rude and short with her. And and then we ended up getting into a big fight because I was just being a jerk and a baby because I was upset about the game. So I remember that, and fortunately, she still married me, and we're still married today. So
Well,
uh, we overcame. But yeah, I just remember, I was so mad, and I just was like pouting.
yeah.
We lost that game.
Well, I don't know. I don't know. Sorry about that. I mean, I wish I could say it was any better. I've had my
Yeah,
moments of
I
sports
wish I could
anger.
say I was better today than I
Yeah.
was back then.
Yeah. Yeah.
We're going to stay with the MAC for our number 7 game. It's the 2005 game at Ohio. So 2005, Pitt has a new head coach by the name of Dave Wanstead. Lots of excitement that year because Pitt had played in a BCS Bowl the year before, and then they brought in Wanstead, who was a Pitt guy. He was from Pittsburgh, went to Pitt, coached at Pitt. He brought so much passion to the program. And the first game of the season is a home game against Notre Dame. It's nationally televised. Keith Jackson is there to call the game for ABC, and Pitt loses pretty handily. So tough way to start the Dave Wanstead regime, but okay, that was a tough opening game, Notre Dame. And they like we said before, they usually don't have a tough opening game. They usually have like these warm-up games. So that the warm-up game was going to be the second game of the season, where they went to Ohio. And in Ohio, there was lots of optimism there too. They also had a new coach, Frank Solich, who had been at Nebraska, and Ohio. They hadn't been on national television since 1969. So this game was on ESPN. It actually ends up being among the top 15 most viewed college football games ever on ESPN2. And their stadium, Peden Stadium, it was its largest crowd ever, almost 25,000 people for that game to watch Ohio versus Pitt. 2 of those people in attendance were Steve and I. We made the dubious decision to drive all the way to Athens for this game. And if you've ever been to Athens, Ohio, it's a great college town. And man, the people there couldn't have been nicer to us. We had
They
our like
were.
Pitt shirts
Yeah.
on, and
Yeah.
everybody was just super nice and welcoming and cordial. And I remember Steve and I were like, man, I feel bad we're going to blow this team out. They're so excited and they're so nice. And then the way the game started, uh, Pitt returns the opening kickoff for a touchdown. It was Larod Stevens howling. I think it was like a 90-something yard return too.
Yeah.
So
You kind of felt like, oh, they're off. Okay, this one's going to be over in a hurry. Yeah.
right. I think even the people like sitting next to us was like, okay, well, you guys are going to win, obviously, but we're just excited because it's on ESPN, and they were just kind of happy to be there. And then things start getting little dicey. Ohio gets a pick six in the first half off of Tyler Palko as the Pitt quarterback, and then they also kicked a field goal, and they actually lead 10-7 for almost the whole rest of the game. The Pitt offense, well, the Ohio offense couldn't do anything. Like they just couldn't move the ball at all. But Pitt's offense was even worse, and at least the Ohio offense, didn't have a pick six. Both quarterbacks throw for under 120 yards. I mean, that's just terrible. 100 or under 120 yards. passing. In the final minutes, Pitt finally puts together a drive. They get it inside the Ohio 10-yard line, but they can't score a touchdown, so they have to settle for a field goal. So I think I know, Steve, I was thinking at this point, okay, bad game, but now the offense is finally clicking and they'll pull it out in overtime because Ohio's offense isn't doing anything. And on his first pass of overtime, Palka is picked off by Dion Byram, who was the same guy that had picked him off for the touchdown in the first half. And he runs untouched 80 yards down the field for the game-winning touchdown. And the fans like storm the field. I don't remember if you and I just sat in our seats as everybody just stormed the field, or if
I
we
think
just
we tried to get like beat it out of there before, like,
yeah,
people like started getting too crazy.
yeah. It was just unbelievable. Like Pitt
Joe Del
lost its game.
Sardo, that was the receiver. I remember because he didn't play much after that.
That was the intended receiver on that play.
Yeah, because I
Yeah.
remember like he didn't play much after that. They're kind of like, yeah. I never thought much of Joe Del Sardo. I mean, when I'm taller and faster than you, I don't know why you're playing college football.
He was like the who was the
We
guy?
used to call him Rudy. I don't know because he was so short. He was just like so short.
He was like almost like a Ryan Switzer kind of player. Like you're like, why is
Ryan Switzer was like tall compared to that. I mean, he was very. Laurent Stevens Howling might even been taller than him. Maybe not. I don't know. Laurent Stevens Howling was short, but he was really fast.
he was a good athlete.
Yeah, and he would actually be physical. Like I always felt like Del Sardo was afraid to hit, like didn't want to get like hit or anything. Like Howlings would definitely get it. What he had, he would give you everything. You always felt like he gave you everything you had. And never, I don't know. Del Sardo, I just never had much confidence in him.
Well, we never got to find out because the ball never got to him, and it was picked off. And yeah, I mean, just to lose a game to a MAC school where you didn't give up an offensive touchdown the whole game. I mean, it just that was a tough one to swallow, and to lose it on a pick six in overtime. And Ohio wasn't even good that year. Like Toledo, when Toledo won in 2003, they actually were a good MAC team. Ohio finishes that year 4-7. So they're not even good in the MAC. I mean, that one just hurt. And I think you and I being there, I just was like, wow,
Yeah, it
you
makes it
know,
stick out. And to Frank Solich's credit, like he was good at Nebraska, and they ran him out of town,
right.
and they really haven't been successful since he left. Outside of that 4-7 season, he's won the MAC a couple of times, and
Yes.
every year they get like 8 wins, 6 to 8 wins in
Yeah.
the MAC.
He's done a really good job there for sure.
Yeah,
But this was kind of like
but
Juan
this
said,
was
it
his
was his
first
first
year.
year.
Yeah,
Yeah. You don't have your own recruits yet, all that kind of stuff. So he definitely was a good coach and did good things for the program. But at this point, I mean, Pitt should have won that game. I mean, it
well,
shouldn't have even.
you score like one touchdown and you win. Or
Yes.
I mean, if they just would have got up by even like 4 points, Ohio probably would have had no answer.
I'll take it a step further. If they return the opening kickoff for a touchdown and then just kneel every series and punt, then they win the game. I'm not kidding. Like they would have. So
Nice.
number 6 on the list is the 1975 game versus Penn State. So we talked about this game in this era. We did an episode about Johnny Majors. And in 1975, Pitt's really starting to build something special. They at this the game against Penn State's the last game of the season, and at this point they have a 7-3 record. They're ranked in the top 20, and Penn State is ranked number 10. So this is just for the first time in a while, Penn State is a really huge game. And Pitt had just upset number 9 Notre Dame the week before. So I mean they're really turning a lot of heads. Again, this is a team to be reckoned with now. The game is being played at Three River Stadium instead of at Pitt Stadium, and it's on national television. Which again, this is pre the days of cable, right? So to be on TV, to be on national TV, it was a big deal. Penn State, right now at this point, Penn State had won the previous 9 meetings, and they had won it by a combined score of 387 to 129. Because again, Pitt just stunk before this, but now this is going to be the year that okay, now Pitt's really going to compete with Penn State. The game ends up being a defensive battle. Pitt gets the only score of the first half on a long touchdown run by Elliott Walker, the running back. And Pitt has a kicker by the name of Carson Long. And at the time, Carson Long is the best kicker in the history of the program. He's actually later drafted by the Buffalo Bills in the NFL. He's super accurate on field goals and he's automatic on extra points. He has a streak actually of 60 consecutive extra points made over the 3 years he's been at Pitt. But after that Elliott Walker touchdown run, his extra point is blocked. And what happens is the Penn State defensive back like leaps over the center and like he times the snap perfectly and just leaps over him and blocks it. Now you can't do that today. They've made that illegal in college football. I believe it's illegal in the pros too, but it's definitely illegal in college football. But at the time, you could do that, and that's what happens. He blocks the extra point. So Pitt still has a 6-0 lead into the fourth quarter. Now Penn State finally mounts a drive. They also score on a long run, and they make the extra point. Steven mentioned in our Johnny Majors episode that their kicker was Chris Barr, who was a professional soccer player, which I
Yeah.
still don't understand how that was possible, but whatever. So he makes the extra point. And now it's 7-6 Penn State. But Pitt finally, after the whole day of just being stymied on offense, Pitt finally kind of figures out the Penn State defense. And they in the fourth quarter they put together 3 long, solid offensive drives, and none of those get into the end zone, but all 3 get into field goal range. And again, they have the best kicker in school history. But Carson Long misses all 3 field goals, including one with 3 seconds left that would have won the game. And one of those kicks, I believe the second of those kicks was literally the length of an extra point, maybe even been shorter. I mean, it was a chip shot. So Pitt loses to Penn State in a huge game. Penn State goes to the Sugar Bowl to face Bear Bryant in Alabama, and Pitt is left going to the Sun Bowl to play Kansas. And had Pitt won this game, which they should have, that turns out differently. And people were really trying to figure out what the heck happened with the kicker that day. He was married at the time, and his wife had a baby that morning. And so people were like, "Oh, well, he had a baby, he had a kid that morning, so his mind must have been distracted." But Long says years later, it was actually the guy leaping over the line to block that extra point. He said, "quote For the rest of the game, I was looking for that guy. That's what happened." So I guess that's what got into his head. And just a totally unreal way to lose a football game. You miss 3 field goals with the most accurate kicker you've ever had in your biggest rivalry game. So yeah, kicking's definitely gonna, we mentioned kicking in previous losses in this episode. It'll come up again. Long, unfortunately, gets like a bunch of "go kill yourself" mail. This was before the days when you could just threaten people's lives online. You had to actually like mail them a letter. So that's unfortunate. But it kind of has a happy ending for Carson Long because Pitt does win the national championship the following year, and Long is a key part of that team.
Good for him. But yeah, that is weird that he missed like 3. I mean, I guess good for Penn State getting in his head like that. Like, I don't know what the defense for that for a guy jumping over the center was. I guess maybe that's why there is really no. I mean, is there a
Well,
way to stop that? I don't know.
no. I mean, you can try to stop it with the snap count. I mean, that's the whole thing. Like it has to be timed perfectly because you're doing it before the center like stands up. That's the only way you can perfect that. So if you can work the snap count so that they can't time it, that's the only way to stop it. I think it was a safety thing though. It got to be a safety thing, and they outlawed it, but they didn't outlaw it till like I want to say like 2017 or something.
Yeah, it was just a couple years ago because I think that happened in the 2020 season or this season as we're recording it. Because I remember wasn't it against Dallas? They said Dallas did that or something like that.
Oh, in
The
the
Steelers.
NFL, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
and like they got away with it. Like I don't know if like they just I don't know what
Well,
happened.
again, I don't know exactly what the rule was in the pros. I just know in college is they definitely made it illegal. But
Well,
at the time,
kicking in college is such a crapshoot. I mean, even the good teams normally don't have that great of a kicker.
Well, especially
Uh,
back then. And this kid was a straight on kicker. He wasn't like a soccer style kicker, but again, at the time he made everything. Like he didn't
hmm,
miss kicks. So it is a crapshoot that Carson Long was very, very accurate. And of course, in the biggest game of I mean, that was the biggest game in decades. When they were playing Penn State, when they were ranked number 9, up to that point.
yeah.
And again, national TV, they actually have the game at Three Rivers, uh, which was a big deal to move the game there. And then he misses 3 field goals in the fourth quarter. It just, again, Pitt finding new ways to lose tragically. The number 5 game is the 2002 game versus Texas A&M. This one was at Heinz Field. It was the second game of the season. Texas A&M is a pretty good team that year. They're ranked number 20. But Pitt has a good team that year too. They actually will eventually be ranked as high as number 17. But in this game, the Aggies have Pitt's number early. They go up 14-0 in the second half, and this quarterback at this point for Pitt is Rod Rutherford. He's the new starter that year, and he's really struggling. And the student section actually starts chanting, "We want Palco." Tyler Palco was, I think he was redshirting at the time, but they were chanting for him. But Rutherford, he hears that, but he kind of overcomes it. He leads Pitt on a touchdown drive, to cut the score in half. And what happens next is just bizarre. So Walt Harris is the Pitt coach, and he'd been using this formation on kick attempts called the swinging gate. And Steve, I don't know, can you describe this formation? Like, do you remember this? Like when they
Yes,
used to do
I
this?
was at the game and I
I was
remember. I
too.
think I was at this game. I was actually, this happened on, I wasn't in my regular seats. I don't know, because I think we were on the goal line. We're in different seats and we were on that goal line. Because I remember there was another, if this is the same game, that controversial call where I remember we were right on the goal line and the runner for Texas A&M didn't cross the line and they called it the touchdown. They were just like, good enough. But so what happens is like all the offensive line and everybody kind of lines up on the one side of the center with the ball, and the holder and the kicker are just kind of standing in the middle of the field, and they start to do a count. And like if the defense doesn't like go over there with them, I guess they just run a play where they throw the ball, they run into the end zone or something. But eventually everybody moves over to where the ball is, and it's like a traditional kick. And that's why it's called the swinging gate, because everybody just kind of all moves in motion. And I think the problem was somebody had a wrong jersey number. That's actually what the problem was.
Yeah, yeah,
Because
yeah.
because
So what?
I remember when it happened. Well, I guess you haven't said the second time, right? Because this actually happened
Well,
twice.
let's talk about what happened first. So yeah, like the play, like you said. I mean, the goal of that is like,
It's supposed to confuse them or something.
yes,
It doesn't seem to have much of an advantage.
it,
Like
it
I guess when you actually go for two, it'll be like, oh, whoa, they went for two this time.
yeah, it's supposed to catch them off guard. And like you said, like the defense might be like, well, what's this formation? Where do I stand? I don't like a defensive team that's not well prepared might not know where to line up. And then all of a sudden you have like some guy totally uncovered and you could just get an easy 2-point conversion. And I actually watched a high school coach on YouTube describe this, and he said he loves it. I love it. I use it all the time. And he said, um, because again, sometimes teams just get confused. And they said even if they're well coached, he said, well, then they have to prepare for it all week. And to me, like, okay, maybe in high school, but like Division I college football, you're not gonna catch Texas A&M, the number 20 team in the country,
Well,
just
I will say
totally
that
off guard.
this might be the only time it'll be effective, because like Texas A&M is an out of conference, a team that Pitt doesn't play every year. Like I could see like a team like, I don't know, like Syracuse or like,
But they
I
watch
don't
film. I mean,
like,
and
yeah, but
and
I
Pitt
think
did this all the time.
it's like the triple option. If you don't play against it, it's not the same as like you can watch it on film all you want, but you have to actually like it's the same on offense and defense with the triple. You actually have to practice it. to
Y-
really get a
yeah.
feel for it. And I think once you played against it once 1 year, the player, like if you continue playing that offense every year, you're very prepared for it.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I just, to me it's like coaches coaches in football, college, pro, they just they like they outthink themselves sometimes. And here you're down 14-0, just kick the extra point. Like I never liked that they used to do this. It looked dumb. They did it every single extra point, and they never once ran any kind of trick play out of it. They just did it to be like, "Ooh, what are we doing? We're going over here. We're going over there. You'll never know.
Yeah.
You at least won't jump over our center like you did in 1975."
Yeah.
So what happens? So yeah. So you were referencing this earlier. So what happens is they run this, and the refs flag them for an illegal shift penalty and move them 5 yards back. And now they're 5 yards back, and Pitt stubbornly just decides to do it again, and then they get flagged again. So they actually get called for an illegal shift twice. They have to move the extra point way back, and then they miss the extra point.
Well, actually, it's a weird thing because like I remember the officials, like the first time I really wasn't paying that attention. I remember the flag going, and then they did it again. And I remember the official was on our side because once again we were on the goal line. He walked over to the head official, the guy in the white hat, that's the head official, and like talked to him for like a minute. And then after a minute of talking, he threw the flag. So I don't know if he was like, "Well, what the hell? It's the same issue," or if he was like, "F this, I'm getting paid to screw Pitt over." Like, because he was the same guy that called the running back in for a touchdown. I'm pretty sure it was that same game. So
Well, and it was a Pac-12 crew. That was one of the things that was brought up afterwards. It was a Pac-12 crew, but then, I mean, it's again, Harris. So they asked Harris after the game, and he's beside himself. He's like, "We've been doing that all year. We did that all last year. We did that in the first game this year." And they asked him like, what was the explanation from the officials, and he said he was so flustered he doesn't even remember. Harris also kind of throws his special teams under the bus by saying that he actually, because they were like, "Why did you run it twice?" And he said, "Well, I called it off the second time, but they ran it anyway." So that, I thought that was kind of a
some
crummy
great,
move.
control. Like call a timeout then, and like I
Yeah.
think what it was somebody was wearing the wrong like a number. It was so like deep procedural. It wasn't even like where the guy was standing. It was like because he was wearing a certain number or something like that. And it was
What?
just, yeah, it was a dumb rule. And like to get caught, you called on it once, fine. Call timeout and put somebody else there or change his jersey. I don't know.
Or just line up and kick the extra point,
Yeah,
and don't run a fancy swinging gate formation. And it ends up being the difference in the game, because
yeah.
Pitt scores what should be the tying touchdown in the final minutes, but because they missed the PAT on the first one, now they have to go for two, and they don't get it. So I mean, again, more like more new ways to lose a football game. We lost a football game on the swinging gate formation.
Yeah, that was infamous. I guess I should have like started to turn heads that maybe Walt Harris wasn't the greatest coach in the world either. He was a
Yeah,
really good offensive coordinator, though. He was that. So
he was, and he recruited some really good players. In fact, the one footnote for this game, there was an unknown backup freshman receiver that had a really good game. He catches 10 passes for 103 yards in this game. And people are like, "Oh, who's that guy?" Steve, you remember his name?
yeah, Larry Fitzgerald. Yeah, he had a really pretty good game that day. And
Yes.
he actually the next year he did even better. He smoked Texas A&M. Like, oh my gosh,
Yeah,
they
they
put two
played.
guys on him and they couldn't cover him. They played him in Kyle. Where is it? Where they had
They were at Texas A&M,
College
and
Station. Yeah,
yeah, and
yeah,
he makes like a diving. You could probably go still find that play on YouTube, because he makes like a super diving catch in the end zone
yeah.
against Texas A&M the next year. So yeah, he ends up being pretty good. Not as good as Jason White, but pretty good. So number
Well,
4 on our list.
another fun fact is Bruce Grakowski has played way more in the NFL than Jason White ever did.
Yes. That's true. That's a very
So
good point.
put that in your pipe and smoke it, I guess. I don't know. Yeah.
Poor Jason Wade. Number 4 on our list is the 2014 game versus Houston in the Lockheed Martin Armed Forces Bowl.
This
So
is the game. This is the one.
Yes.
I'm gonna break. There's gonna be a certain coach that's really not gonna like this. I hope he listens. So
Yeah, this game. So this is the only bowl game on our list. 2014, Pitt has a 6-6 season. It's definitely an up and down season. There's a couple of games that from that season that could have made this list. There's the Duke game where Chris Blewett misses like a very much chip shot field goal to win the game. I think that was again like extra point length. And then there's the Georgia Tech homecoming game where Pitt fumbles 4 times in their first 6 plays to go down 28-0 in the first 6 minutes of the game. That was I don't think you'll ever see that again. Down 28-0 6 minutes into the game because of fumbles. But Pitt kind of overcomes that. They fight hard. They qualify for a bowl game. It's the 3rd year for head coach Paul Chryst, but he gets an offer from Wisconsin where that's kind of his dream job. So he leaves on December 17th, and Pitt's playing in this game under an interim head coach, Joe Rudolph. But Pitt's up for the challenge, and they're blowing out Houston. They're leading by 25 points with 11 minutes left in the game. And just for some reference, 25 points. So 25 points with 11 minutes left. 25 points is the lead that the Atlanta Falcons famously blew in the Super Bowl to the Patriots. That was late in the 3rd quarter. Okay. And everybody remembers, oh my gosh, how could you blow a 25-point lead late in the 3rd quarter? Pitt's up by 25 with 11 minutes left in the game. Houston scores a touchdown, but Pitt does get some of the points back with a field goal. So now it's 34-13 with 3 minutes and 45 seconds left in the game. I just want to repeat that for effect. Pitt is up 34-13. That's a 21-point lead with under 4 minutes left to go in regulation. So Houston scores a touchdown, fine, garbage time touchdown, who cares? So now they have to do an onside kick. An onside kick is a play that has probably about a 10 to 15% success probability. It's just really hard to recover an onside kick. Well, Houston recovers it. And now they drive and they score another touchdown. So now they're only down by 7, but again, you have to do onside kicks. So they have to do another onside kick. And if the odds are 10 to 15% of recovering one onside kick, I don't know what the odds are. I imagine they're pretty low of recovering 2 onside kicks in a row. I mean, that's almost impossible. But that's exactly what Houston does. They recover the second onside kick. They drive 57 yards in 4 plays, and not only score the touchdown, but because they've come this far, they decide we're going to go for 2 to win the game, and they get that too. Pitt actually has time for one final possession. Like amazingly, they score all 3 of these touchdowns and leave time on the clock. Yeah. They almost get into field goal range, but Tyler Boyd, who is the school's all-time leading receiver, drops a pass, and the game ends Houston 35, Pitt 34. It's a historic loss. It's the biggest blown lead ever in a bowl game that's decided in regulation. And that's just point margin. I can't imagine what the stats are for, being up 21 with under 4 minutes left. So Pitt loses a game where they're up 21 with under 4 minutes left in the game. It's just astounding.
All right. Can I have the floor, Your Honor, for a minute here?
Please vent.
Yeah. Here's the problem with all of this is it's classic Pitt because we have to change coaches every 2 years. So that's part of the problem is you change coaches, and Joe Rudolph does not care. That's the biggest problem with Joe Rudolph. And that's the thing that still irritates me to this day. So you know why Houston recovered those 2 onside kicks? Do you know why?
Why?
Because Pitt, on the first one, maybe you got caught off guard. They put defensive linemen Juan Price, who's really good at sacking the quarterback, but not if he was good at catching passes, he'd be a tight end, not a defensive lineman. And he misses, he boffs, muffs the first onside kick. Okay, you are caught. That's fine. The next one's coming. So they put him out there again, and he does it again. And it's just, why? Why? And then after the game, Joe Rudolph, who did this, who made this coaching decision, goes and blames the players. Says, well, I hope the players learn something. Well, Joe, did you learn how to coach? Because now you're going to Wisconsin with your buddy Chris, and he's still a coach at Wisconsin. Never took any responsibility for that game. I realize you're on your way out the door, stick at the pit, have fun. I mean, that's great, but you're a jerk. You're a jerk. And you totally stuck it to a college player that I don't think Juan ever had much of a NFL career. They thought maybe he would. It's just, it irritated me to no end. Like, it's one thing to lose and lose like this, and this is a really bad Pitt loss, but to literally lose because your coach just does not give a crap, is so checked out that, yeah, we're going to let a defensive lineman play on the onside kick hands team. Like, who does that? Who does, like how is it? Why are you still a coach? Like, I hope he gets a head coaching job somewhere someday, because I would love this. I hope that team never wins a game. And I like Paul Chryst, and I think Paul Chryst is a good coach. And I don't think Joe Rudolph was his offensive coordinator or something weird like that, or I don't know what he was on his staff, but that was just the biggest jerk move to throw college players that aren't even pro, because you put them in a position to fail. I mean, you just literally put a person in a position to fail. And that's what irritated me about this game more than anything. It's just not taking any responsibility for it. And what do you have to lose? Be a stand-up guy. Oh, I blew a call. You're on your way out the door. It's not like Pitt can fire you. I mean, that's what makes it even more like, just sleazy, is like, you could have totally been a stand-up guy and said, I screwed up. The first time was, we got caught, but the second time was inexcusable. I just didn't communicate in time, whatever it was. But it's just to not take any responsibility. What a jerk. What an absolute jerk.
So like, what are your real feelings about the game?
Yeah, it was the cherry on top of a sundae. That game was so frustrating. The defense couldn't stop anything. Maybe they should have made a play on defense somewhere along the line, but just
it was unbelievable watching it unfold. Like, it was like a train wreck in slow motion. And the only thing I remember about that game is I had the flu. I was like sitting on the couch, like feverish, with like a box of tissues, and I just was like, it was like a fog watching that game. I could not believe it.
Yeah, and their defense was really bad, like, for a year. I mean, their defense still isn't great, but it's gotten better since then. That was kind of like one of the things, like, I will say Narduzzi had to fix, because like Pitt kind of, like, I think that whole season they had like that hiccups, like in the fourth quarter, they would give up big leads. And and that is the one thing, like, I will give Narduzzi credit. He did kind of like change at least that part of the Pitt culture. So,
well, number 3 on the list is another game that Steve's definitely going to get fired up for, because he was there, and we've talked about this one in some previous episodes as well. It's the 1994 game versus West Virginia at Pitt Stadium. And, we talked about Pitt being bad in the 90s. I think I don't know if you can really describe how truly awful Pitt was during that Johnny Majors second stint era in the 90s. I think if you wanted to sum it up in one play, it's the David Boston punt return against Ohio State, where Ohio State's winning the game 65-0, and they punt the ball to David Boston, and Ohio State, because they're just up 65-0 and they're not really even paying attention, they only put like 7 guys on the field. Like, literally, they have like 7 or 8 guys on the field for the punt return, and David Boston still returns the punt all the way. So I think if you wanted to sum up that era in one play,
I think Pitt was on the power play there, and just shorthanded punt return. They have
shorthanded. massively shorthanded punt return. On October 15th, 1994, Pitt's 1-5. Again, they stink. West Virginia's coming to Pitt Stadium. West Virginia's not really that great. West Virginia was kind of between eras. They were really good in the late 80s with Major Harris, and then they had some really good teams in the late 90s and early 2000s. But at this point, they're middle of the road Big East team. Of course, they're still better than Pitt because everybody was still better than Pitt. And in the 1994 Pitt team had really two things going for it. Number one, it's Curtis Martin's senior year. So even if they're bad, it's like, okay, Curtis Martin, he's going to be a star. Well, he gets hurt in the second game of the season, and that's the end of his year. So that's out the window. And the only other thing it had going for it was the WVU game, the backyard brawl, because no matter how bad Pitt was, winning that game would just make the whole season worthwhile. And remember, they're not playing Penn State anymore at this point. So that's the big game. So it starts out as a typical, Pitt blowout. So many of the games in that era were just out of control. Point differentials. It's 31-6 West Virginia, but then it turns into arguably the single craziest game in the history of the backyard brawl. There are 3 blocked field goals in this game, 2 of which are returned for touchdowns, 1 for each team. I mean, when do you ever see that? There's a blocked punt. There's a pick six. There's a fumble return for a touchdown. There's a 100-yard interception return of a 2-point conversion attempt.
Yeah, that was kind of the point of the game when that happened.
Yeah,
because that put West Virginia up by like 28, or that was early in the second quarter or something. Yeah,
there's about 1,000 yards of total offense from both teams. Reuben Brown for Pitt, he punches a guy for West Virginia.
He got benched the whole series for that. Yeah,
did he? Well, he learned his lesson. Pitt comes all the way back to tie the game at 33, and so it's tied at 33. There's a minute and a half left in the game. And West Virginia wide receiver Rashawn Vanterpool gets behind the Pitt defense for an 81-yard touchdown reception. So just a classic Pitt way to lose such a big game. You come all the way back to tie it, and then you surrender an 81-yard bomb in the final 90 seconds. But again, that's no. That's just not Pitt enough way to lose a game, right? You can't just give up an 81-yard bomb. No, that's not enough. So John Ryan is the Pitt quarterback, and my goodness, I mean, that kid, he just wasn't very good at quarterback. Let's just leave it at that. I mean,
John Ryan could do one thing. He couldn't throw the short pass. He couldn't throw the medium pass. He couldn't throw over the middle or to the sidelines. But you know what? He was like Rex Grossman. When it came to chucking it deep, he was your man. If you could just drop him back there. And he had they had Billy Davis, or what? No, it was Billy West.
Well, Billy West was the running back. Billy Davis was the receiver. Yeah.
Well, he had him, and then he had Billy West, who was a pretty good running back. So you could kind of set it up, and that's kind of, I think, how it went down. Is like West Virginia had to really stop the run, so it left the guy, and that's what Ryan was good at. Just drop back, because he threw a couple interceptions where he did that. He just heaved it deep, and they would pick it off, but it was like, oh, it's on third down anyway, and it's like a punt. But yeah, John Ryan wasn't very good, but man, that day, and he beat Beasley, the cornerback for West Virginia, who played in the pros for like 9 years. I mean,
right. Yeah. So this is like this is his moment, right? This is his once in a lifetime moment. And he heroically leads Pitt all the way down the field. Remember, there's only 90 seconds left in the game. All the way down the field, throws a touchdown pass with 30 seconds left to force overtime. If they can make the extra point. But hang on a second. Majors gets bold. He says, you know what? This game's crazy. Forget overtime. We're gonna try to win the game right here. And he makes a really gutsy decision to go for 2. And the play call is like a RPO by Ryan, who is not a running quarterback. And he converts it. He fakes the handoff and he keeps it himself and he converts. And Pitt's done it. They've come all the way back to tie the game. And then even after WVU scored the touchdown, they scored a touchdown and they went for 2 to win. But there's still 30 seconds left. Okay, so maybe enough time for West Virginia to get into field goal range. But we talked before about all the blocked field goals. you weren't really worried about them getting into field goal range. Like it's not a good kicking game. So you just had to keep them out of the end zone with 30 seconds left. All they really could do was some kind of a prayer pass. Well, Steve, you want to describe it from here because, you know,
Well, I've described it before. Yeah. Norris Mosley, who I really liked, was the pick corner. I actually remember that because I was watching him on the play. And for some reason, as was the name you haven't written down there, that Zach Abraham
yeah.
runs to the sideline. And for some reason, Morris Mosley get like bites on a fake or something. And he kind of stumbles. And Abraham just like is wide open running down the field at like the 20-yard line of Pitt. And at that point, I looked back at the quarterback for West Virginia and thought, well, maybe he didn't see him. Well, his arm was like already like in motion, like, throwing the ball. And so it's like I'm seeing the future before it happened. I'm literally like 1 second ahead, like, and the ball's in the air, drop it, drop it, drop it. And the guy's like wide open. That's the only thing you can hope for. He just catches the ball and calmly walks into the end zone. And yeah, that's it. That was a gut puncher on that one. That's probably outside of like the AFC Championship game in like 2004. I got to say that's one of the most, or Sid Slid. That's like definitely top three. Well, 2000. Well, that's on this list too. That other game, Cincinnati game, is definitely on this list.
Yeah.
That's my top five all time worst. I mean, beside the Penguins, Cup, Darwin Cup. I mean, that's definitely
yeah,
Oof.
it's bad. It's real bad. 60-yard pass in the final seconds.
I think just because I saw it happen before it happened,
Yeah.
it was like I could see the future. I was like, uh-oh. Yeah.
Well, and like, how can you leave a guy wide open in that situation? Like, aren't you
I
playing
don't know.
way back?
Well, he was on him, and then for some reason the guy like kind of ran like I
Yeah.
don't even know what the guy was running. He just kind of like made a move to the sideline, and
So
Mosley like stumbled and fell.
So here's what happened. So the quarterback for West Virginia was Chad Johnston. The play before that, he had scrambled to get them to the 40-yard line. He scrambled and he ran out of bounds. And so on this play, he starts scrambling and he starts running forward before he threw that pass. And I think Mosley maybe thought, oh, he's going to run, and that's where he kind of like hesitated.
So like I said, I wasn't watching the quarterback. I was watching Mosley the whole.
Right.
I was actually that's why I saw it happen, because I was watching the guy who would catch the whole time. I wasn't watching the ball. Yeah.
But even then, how did you have like a one-on-one again? I mean, like you had to guard against them getting into field goal range, but it would have been so much better had they lost the game on a field goal, because that happens. 30 seconds left, and maybe they get enough plays to get into long field goal range. But it's like to give up a 60-yard bomb. It was unbelievable. And I've told this story before. I was sitting at the parking lot of the place where the fast food restaurant where I worked at the time. I was in high school, and listening to it on the crackling radio. I could barely hear it. And after they kicked off, and I think I listened to like one play, and they were like, oh, there's 24 seconds left or whatever, and West Virginia has a ball at their own 20. I'm like, okay, it's over. And I went to work, and I came home 8 hours later and was talking to my brother and my dad about, oh man, what a game. I can't believe Pitt won. And they're like, what are you talking about? So I had those 8 hours of bliss where I thought that Pitt had won the game until I found out what actually happened. Number 2 on the list, 2019.
Bliss didn't last forever.
No, it did not last long. Number 2 on the list, 2019 at Penn State. I have to take a deep breath for this one. So after a 16-year hiatus, Pitt and Penn State start playing each other again for a 4-year series. Pitt wins in 2016. We did an episode about that 2016 Pitt team. Penn State wins in 2017 and 2018. So 2019 is going to be the last Penn State game, possibly forever. Penn State claims the schedule is just too tight for them to add Pitt, but meanwhile they're out there inking deals to play Temple and Delaware. So I mean,
it is funny this year. Like, what didn't Coastal Carolina and BYU schedule a game in like 3 days? Yeah. Like, it's like 5 years out. That's not enough. And then like this year, it's like two teams are like, on Wednesday, they're like, "Hey, can you play?" It's like Little League. Can you play on Saturday? Yeah, we're good. Our field's available. It's like,
We could do a whole hour-long discussion of the history of arrogance with Penn State football. Arrogance so high that it sadly led to a bunch of kids getting abused and nobody doing anything about it. But that's for another day. Let's talk about this 2019 game. Penn State's ranked number 13 in the country. They were obviously heavy favorites to beat Pitt at home. They had actually destroyed Pitt at Heinz Field the previous season. But it's a rivalry game. Anything can happen. And sure enough, it's a really hard-fought, close game. It's 10-10 at halftime. Penn State gets a touchdown in the third quarter. They take a 17-10 lead, and it stays that way into the fourth quarter when Kenny Pickett, the Pitt quarterback, leads the Panthers on a 10-play, 65-yard drive. And the key play of that drive is a sideline pass to Sear Mack, the receiver, who makes just an unbelievable leaping catch at the 1-yard line. I mean, it's just an amazing catch. So now Pitt has first and goal. It's not even at the one. It's like inside. They actually spot the ball inside the 1-yard line. So there's only 5 minutes left in the game. Pitt's all set to tie things up at 17. Well, on first down, they run a play action pass. No one's open. Pickett throws it away. On second down, Pickett runs a run pass option and he gets stuffed. Now it's third down. They run another pass play, but no one blocks the Penn State lineman, and Pickett almost gets sacked, but again is forced to throw the ball away. So 3 plays at the half-yard line, they can't get anywhere. Now it's down to fourth down. And remember, okay, Pitt's down by 7. There's only 5 minutes left. So they have to score a touchdown. So this goes back to, again, the whole theme of this episode, right? Going back to like a functional, healthy sports team would lose the game by getting stuffed here on all 4 plays. I mean, that would suck. That would be awful.
not sending out your defensive lineman twice, not running the swinging gate twice, not having your like kicker that can kick 60-yard field goals in the rain at Heinz Field, miss an extra point.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, and this, like, that happens, right? Like, I know they had the ball at the 1-yard line, but goal line stands happen. Sometimes defenses just make a stand at the 1-yard line. So again, a healthy team gets stuffed on all 4 plays. But what happens here is that head coach and math wizard Pat Narduzzi sends out his kicker. And if this is too dramatic of a statement, Steve, stop me. But to me, it's the single worst coaching call in the history of Pittsburgh sports.
I wasn't as bothered by this at the time. So I don't know. Maybe I'm just getting older and I have a little different perspective on life sometimes. As you get older, things, change. I didn't have it because how much you said there were 5 minutes. Yeah. So they got a chance to get the ball back. But now I'm looking to this and I've been thinking this because I've been reading the notes ahead. I know. And I've been thinking about, well, I didn't have a problem because I thought they'd get the ball back again. Right. But either way, you're going to have to score a touchdown.
That's right.
And you're really close. So like, you're going to be way farther away. Like it would be easier to kick the field goal. Like, I think he got confused. Like all I can say is like, when you're down 10 points, kicking the field goal is the right call. Like, don't screw around. Don't use up all your time, kick the field goal. When you're down by 7, it's a little different. You probably, because even let's say you don't get it, well, I guess, they're still stuck in their own end and you can still make a play and get the ball back in decent field position. So
if you're down 10, I think if you're down 10 and you kick the field goal from the inch-yard line, I think even then people would still be like, what are you doing? This is like, you have to score a touchdown and a field goal. This is your best chance to score a touchdown.
But you might as well go the other team. I think it makes the other team keep playing. Like, whereas if stuff there, the game's over.
Sure.
Like you get stuff here, the game's not over.
If you're down by 2, if you're down by 2 scores, then you can at least make an argument, is what I'm saying.
Yeah.
When you're down by 7, a field goal does nothing. It does nothing.
Because you're still going to have to score a touchdown.
Yes.
Yeah.
And then
if you were down by 6 and you kick the field goal, you say, well, okay, well, maybe, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
it would make more sense, you know?
Yeah. Well, to make it even more embarrassing, they missed the field goal. We talked about Alex Kessman having a real problem with super easy kicks. But
That's right. Yeah.
that didn't even really matter. I mean, because miss the kick, make the kick, you still had to score a touchdown.
Yeah.
And Pitt,
Either way. Yeah.
yeah, and Pitt loses. They did get the ball back, but they didn't get anywhere near as close as the 1 yard line, and they had to throw up like a prayer in the end zone on the last play, and it was incomplete. And uh, Narduzzi, like his explanation, and then of course, they ask him about it after the game, and his explanation just defies logic. Quote, "You need 2 scores to win the football game unless you're playing for overtime. I don't question that decision at all." And then he also talks about like armchair quarterbacks, and it's always easy to second guess people after the fact. I found that super insulting. Like, you need 2 scores you need 2 scores to win the football game, but you need 1 score to tie the football game, and it's a touchdown. It's 7 points. It was just after this. I generally like Narduzzi, but I'll never trust him again. I don't know. I just don't know if I can ever trust him again after that game. It was so unbelievable that he kicked a field goal there. I'm still floored by that decision.
Yeah. I guess I should have been more bothered by that, but I'm still not as bothered as I was.
Well, and it was against Penn State. Like, that was the last Penn State. Like, that might be the last time we ever see a Pitt Penn State game in our lifetime. And for him to do that in that game, I think that just added to the frustration. And then for him to be all like, "Oh, armchair quarterbacks should have done this, should have done that." I mean, it's like you talked before, Steve, about coaches not taking responsibility. Anyway, I can't say anything else about that game. It's just vomit inducing.
It is. It is. It's like, I don't even know what to say. Like, it didn't bother me as much at the time, like I said. And now, like, when you think about it, it's like, well, I guess if you're playing for the win, but like, how much better of a, closer are you going to get to make that play? Like, you're still down to where, you're going to have to score a touchdown either way. So
Right.
I don't know. I don't know what to tell you on that one, except for it's classic Pat Narduzzi, I guess.
It is. All right. Well, that brings us to the number 1 game on the list. It is the 2009 game versus Cincinnati. So the 2009 team is going to be Dave Wannstedt's crowning achievement. Wannstedt, we mentioned before, he's a Pitt alum. He's a former Pitt player and assistant coach. And when he came back, he had spent years in the NFL, and his goal was come back to my hometown, my school, and take this program to the next level. He promises to make recruiting of local guys a priority. That is something that had really been something that Walt Harris hadn't done. He recruited a lot of good players from places like Florida, but that's why you saw Troy Nunes and Bruce Gradkowski and all these guys from Pittsburgh come back and beat Pitt in games. So 2009 is Wannstedt's 5th season, and by this time he's really built a winner. They're still playing in the Big East at this point, and the Big East is not a very good conference, but they're lucky because they still have the spot in the BCS. Pitt has a solid offense that year. Their quarterback is senior Bill Stahl, who had a really solid year that year. And they have Big East Offensive Player of the Year Dion Lewis at running back. Dion Lewis was a great player for Pitt. And
it's hard to believe like how good you forget how good he was.
And he's still playing in the NFL years later.
Yeah.
They also have a budding superstar receiver named Jonathan Baldwin, who actually later ends up being a 1st-round draft pick in the NFL, albeit not a very good one, but was really good that year. And then on defense, they had the Big East co-defensive players of the year, Mick Williams and Greg Romius. So it's a great Pitt team. They go 9-1 to start the season. Their only loss was against Russell Wilson at NC State.
Why isn't that game on the list? Ugh.
It was in contention.
That's another. I think that was a 17-point comeback against Russell. Yeah, that he led like a second half 17-point comeback or something like that.
Yeah, that one was in contention. Didn't
Yeah.
quite make the list. But yeah, 9-1. They're ranked number 8 in the country. That ninth win was against Notre Dame at Heinz Field, and it sets up an interesting scenario because Pitt now has 2 games left. They play at Morgantown and then at home and then home against Cincinnati. Cincinnati that year is undefeated under Brian Kelly, and we mentioned Pitt's only loss was NC State. That was out of conference. So the way that the standings are, if Pitt beats Cincinnati in that season finale, then Pitt wins the Big East and goes to the Sugar Bowl. That was weird because it kind of rendered the WVU game meaningless, and Pitt loses that game on a last-second field goal, but it didn't really matter because I think everybody was just thinking ahead to next week against Cincinnati because that was really the only game that mattered. The Big East didn't have a championship game. Like they didn't have a formal championship game like a lot of the conferences do now. But this was the de facto Big East championship game because whoever won that game was going to win the Big East. It's the single biggest game for Pitt since the Dan Marino era. Would you agree with that, Steve?
Yeah.
In terms of what was at stake?
Outside of some of those Penn State games in the 70s and 80s.
Well, I'm
Yeah.
saying since the Dan Marino era.
No, yeah, really. I mean, there's that blowout game where Penn State blew out that Dan Marino team, and that really probably is the most, consequential game. Yeah.
Yeah, and probably even since 2009, I'd say
They
probably
haven't played in a game like it since. No.
yes. So
No.
it's the single biggest game for Pitt in basically 40 years. And the game's a shootout. Lewis rushes for 194 yards, 3 touchdowns on 47 carries. I did not remember that he had 47 carries in that game.
I remember that because I thought they should run the tire. Because I remember Joe Bendel, who used to be on the, I don't know what happened to him, like complaining about that after the game. And I was like, they're not going to play a game for a month. Who cares?
Yeah.
It's like run them till the wheels fall off.
Well, and he was very effective.
He had an awesome game. He was unstoppable. The offense wasn't the problem in this game. They really weren't.
No, and
for once in Pitt history, the offense really wasn't the issue.
No, and Cincinnati's offense is really good. Also, Tony Pike was their quarterback. He throws for over 300 yards and 3 touchdowns. Pitt jumps out to a 31-10 lead in the second quarter. And I was at this game. Were you at this game, Steve?
Yes, it was.
Yeah, and I just remember thinking, wow, 31-10. Like we're actually gonna win this and win the conference. And then right before halftime, they kick off to Cincinnati, and the guy returns at 99 yards for a touchdown, and that really swung the momentum.
Yeah, that was the turning point of the game. Is that Gilliard touchdown return? Yeah, that was Marty Gilliard. Yeah.
Wow, yeah, that's good memory. I did not remember the guy's name. Well, Cincinnati ultimately comes back to tie the game at 38 with about 5 minutes left. So, again, what a terrible loss. Pitt's going to blow a 21-point lead in the conference championship games, in the conference championship game for the Big East. And again, that's how a normal team would maybe lose a game like this. But Pitt doesn't roll that way, as we've seen in these previous items in this list. So the game's tied. Stahl leads Pitt on a 9-play, 67-yard drive. And with 96 seconds left in the game, Lewis takes it in for the go-ahead touchdown. And Heinz Field just erupted. I mean, it erupted. That was they go ahead for the touchdown.
Well, the best part of that drive was the Big East was trying to stick it to Pitt again. And that was the infamous, there's no face mask on. Like they literally pulled on Lewis's face mask so bad in that drive. Like his helmet, he got up, his helmet was sideways, and they picked up the flag. It was a complete joke. So
that's right.
Yeah.
That's right. Well, Lewis, I mean, again, great moment at Heinz Field. Lewis comes off the field and Tony Dorsett's there on the sideline and gives him a hug. I mean, just like, I remember feeling like, again, all these years of being a Pitt fan, and this is going to be like our big moment of being Pitt fans. And it was so big that they scored a touchdown on that drive instead of kicking a field goal, because there's still a minute and a half left on the clock. and you knew the way the game had been going. Like, Cincinnati was still going to have a chance to drive down the field, but you score a touchdown. So the worst that they can do is send the game into overtime, right? And then with Dion Lewis, the way he was running, you just thought
Yes. Yeah.
we had a really good chance in overtime. But then Pitt botches the extra point, and it's not even a miss because, again, missing the extra point would be, that wouldn't be on a level high enough for Pitt. Instead, what happens? It's a perfect snap, but the holder is a kid named Andrew Janoko. The ball just slips out of his hands. Like, he catches the ball on the snap, he's going to put it down, and it just slips out of his hands, and they don't even get the kick off, and they get tackled. So now Pitt's only up by 6 instead of 7. Sure enough, Cincinnati drives down the field, and they score a touchdown in the final 30 seconds, and they make the extra point, and they are the Big East champions. And that's it. And that's how they lose, because the ball slipped through his hands. It didn't even slip through his hands. He caught it, and then he was putting it down on the ground. And
He just laid it flat. Yeah. And Janoko was like a big, I guess he was like, his dad is a high school coach at Clearfield, and he was like a high school, like a fairly good high school quarterback who really didn't like belong at Pitt. Like, talent wise, like, he was lucky to just be a backup. Like, quite honestly, he should have went to like a Duquesne or Robert Morris. That was more his like talent. Like, he really wasn't. Like, I don't even know if he could have made it like a Youngstown State, And he was just, obviously, I think he was doing this just to put on a resume. I was on like a big time program. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And he's going to go back to Clearfield and be a high school coach until he's 102. Just followed his father's footsteps, and then all this silliness happened. And he's still a coach somewhere. I know he was at Rutgers and a couple other places for a while. So
Yeah, and I feel bad for him. I mean, but it's just such a classic
yeah,
Pitt way to lose. And Pitt, if they win this game, they play against Tim Tebow in Florida in the Sugar Bowl. And I doubt, Pitt would have. I mean, I don't know what Pitt would have done in that game, but that would have just been the high point of the last 40 years of Pitt football. They win the Big East. They play in the Sugar Bowl against Tim Tebow, who at the time, and maybe even still, is maybe the most celebrated college football player ever. And that program was so celebrated. And, they drop an extra point and they blow it.
Yeah, that's one of the worst. That was bad. That was ugly.
And that's why it's number one. And it's just, again, it's Pitt. It's just you can't just lose. Like Cincinnati was a really good team. They were undefeated, right? If it's a shootout and they just get the ball last and they win, fine.
I think Cincinnati got blown out in the Sugar Bowl too, I think.
Well, Brian Kelly had left by that point for Notre Dame, so I mean that almost wasn't even a real thing because Brian Kelly had left. But regardless, I mean, again, just you couldn't just lose normally, right? You couldn't send the game into overtime and you lose in overtime. It just has to be something. It has to be something unbelievable, something you could never even script if you were writing a movie. And that, folks, is a Pitt loss, and that's our list. So yeah, we could probably, when I first started making this list, I think I had like 20 games on the list, and I just kind of had to whittle it down a little bit. Pitt has supplied a lot of good candidates for this list over the years. I'm sure they will continue to supply good candidates for this list. We love Pitt. We're still huge Pitt fans, but I think it's therapeutic sometimes to just talk through these losses because they're just so unbelievably gut wrenching. Steve, any last thoughts?
Yeah, I don't know what to say about Pitt except for they're tough to watch sometimes, and they definitely don't take it seriously. That's for sure. So.
All right, everybody. Thank you so much for listening. Please check us out on the web or Twitter or Facebook. All those links are in the show description. And please subscribe and leave us a comment if you feel led to do so. That's all. You can help people find the show.
All right. Thanks for listening.
Bye.